Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a superhero review, and today I'll be having a look at ManThing. So ManThing isn't really a superhero at all, to be honest, but he is in Marvel's sort of superhero range of titles, so I will count it as a superhero film. So before I talk about the actual film, I sort of give you some background on the ManThing character if you haven't seen it before or unaware that it's actually a comic book character. So the ManThing was one of a few sort of monster or horror comics, so to speak, that Marvel had sort of in the 70s. And there was some debate whether who came first, ManThing or Swamp Thing. And there's never really been a definitive answer, and it actually seems that they were actually produced around the same sort of time, and then the creators both on Marvel and DC sides actually kind of knew each other. So, you know, would you have to say it was a coincidence that we had two swamp characters come out at the same time? But ManThing and Swamp Thing are quite different. So the ManThing in the comics was basically a human originally called Ted Salis, who was experimenting in the swamp, and there was an accident happened, and his sort of DNA got fused with the chemicals that he was sort of experimenting with and elements from the forest, and thus he became ManThing. Later incarnations actually have him trying to restore the sort of the serum that made Captain America, and try to reproduce that, and again in an accident and in the swamp made him the ManThing. I actually kind of prefer that origin, if I'm completely honest with you, but it's not all that different. Now the ManThing in the comics was essentially a near enough mindless beast. He was a monster. He wasn't necessarily I didn't really have much of a character as such. He certainly wasn't sentient, to be quite honest with you, and he only had the sort of the sort of very, very, very low sort of intelligence. And what he would do, he would kind of just go around, sort of basically wander around the swamp and happen to bump into people. And in the comics, he would react to emotions. And now the emotion he reacted most of was fear. And obviously, he was kind of monstrous, and people generally would fear him. And he would basically try and sort of extinguish the fear by sort of grabbing the person who was afraid of him, and there was a reaction that he had, and that basically made the ManThing burn whoever was, you know, who he touched. Now, none of that's in this film. I've read some reviews online, and some of it actually claims it's quite faithful to the source material. It really isn't. So, depending on if you're going to like this to be, depending how sort of strict you're going to want to be on sort of how things are with the source material. Now, I was quite a big fan of ManThing back in the day, and I still am, to be honest with you. And whilst I'm glad there is a ManThing film, it was never going to be, I don't think it was ever going to be anything more than a B movie. So they have changed significantly ManThing's origin. Now, ManThing did have sort of ties to sort of like more of the mystical sort of side of things in the comics as a sort of time went on. But his origins were, as I say, really from an accident with science, ultimately. But in this film, basically, the ManThing himself is purely a magical creature. He's essentially a spirit sent by nature who's basically trying. Well, they say in this film, basically he's trying to sort of get revenge on the evil people who have raped the land. There's a couple of the film isn't consistent with that, because ManThing essentially just kills anyone who comes near him. He'll basically kill. So and this includes people, just a couple of kids who are just, you know, having sex in the swamp like you do, to police and anyone. So he really isn't a spirit of vengeance like he kind of is we're told that he is, because he's essentially just an animal ultimately. So that's kind of the thing. And now you do hear the name Ted Salis sort of thrown around a lot. One thing that it's important to remember with this film is it is not actually based on the origin story of ManThing, really. Really, the story is told through the eyes of a new police sheriff who is sort of from the city, who's come into the sort of small, we're meant to be like a southern sort of swamp town in America. Well, it's actually shot in Australia. ManThing originally in the comics was actually in the Florida swamps as well. So it's kind of, again, that's changed. So it's really telling his point of view. So all of this has happened within the past. So you don't really you see a couple of sort of very brief sort of flashbacks of sort of ManThing getting created essentially, and we're told a lot of information. But it's obviously completely not what happens in the comics. Now you can understand some things may get changed in an adaptation, and that's fine. But if it's done to the benefit of the story, then that's maybe acceptable, but this isn't. Now, I say with all B-movie reviews that you kind of have to maybe give some leeway, especially with the budget constraints. But, you know, I don't really know why they couldn't have just stuck with the actual story, but there you go. The other thing with this film is ManThing is, again, this is going to depend if you're a fan of ManThing or you're just looking at it as a B-movie. Because the actual creature himself looks okay, I would say, but he doesn't really look like ManThing does in the comics. Now, in the comics, ManThing is probably about as tall, but he's considerably more bulky and sort of sludgy monster. And whilst in here, he's made of sort of branches and twigs, and he most notably had sort of thick roots around his eyes, and almost had like an elephant trunk that sort of come down with sort of glowing red orbs. And whilst he has got the sort of the red eyes, they sort of tend to be almost like little red fireflies sort of flying around in his eye sockets. So it's not, again, the design has been changed. I don't think it's a bad design for a monster for a film, but it doesn't really look like the ManThing we all know and love if you're a fan of the comics. Now, and the other problem here is that a lot of the supporting characters are very, very cartoonish. You know, you've got your sort of stereotypical rednecks, you've got your mystical Indians, you know, you've got your sort of kooky conspiracy theorist, and your typically attractive, you know, female environmental sort of person in there as well. So it's the characters themselves are very, very sort of two-dimensional, so to speak. Now, this being a sci-fi film, so this film was actually made for TV, directly on TV from the SciFi channel in the US. So those sci-fi films tend to always follow the same pattern, and this is true of this film as well. So with the sci-fi films, and this is going to be true, I've mentioned it before, whenever you see these sort of like creature features, because of the budget constraints, they never want to show too much, or well, very rarely will the story really be about the actual creature itself. There's always going to be some kind of like human menace, and in this case, you've got the sort of slimy oil tycoon who's trying to sort of manipulate the system and sort of get the land and whatnot. And that's always the same with these sci-fi films. There's always some kind of like gangsters or some sort of corporation who basically take up the majority of the screen time. And that's what generally what the story's about. And then you have the sort of the creature bit sort of like attached to that kind of story here and there. And that's exactly true of this one, because ultimately that's what happens. You don't really see a lot of the ManThing himself until the last sort of like 10-15 minutes of the film. He'll pop up a few times and kill just a few seemingly random people here and there, but ultimately the story is about these oil tycoons and how they've kind of like sort of coerce their way into getting this land and all that sort of stuff. So that's disappointing, but again, I guess what you'd expect. Now, I would say from watching some of the other sort of like sci-fi films, if you kind of look at it on par with them, maybe this film is slightly a bit above them, because they do use a lot of practical effects. The ManThing creature himself is fairly impressive, as I've said, and it is, rather than just a CGI creation, although there are some CGI enhancements to it, it is actually a practical effect. And also there's some sort of bodies and stuff like that which have sort of a moderate level of gore. But again, you have, again, it's some of it's are argumented with CG. But there you go, this is what they're going to do. So I can't really hold that against them, to be honest with you. But as I've mentioned, because of the way they sort of do this plot, they don't want to have all these effect shots to save their budget. the film does seem a little bit talky and a kind of a little bit long in places where you've just got people sort of aimlessly wandering around the swamp, or you've got just sort of people talking endlessly, it seems, and you really kind of just want to go on with it and sort of have the story more to do with the actual creature itself. One of the things that I personally, there's kind of this like mysterious Indian guy that's always getting blamed, and everyone, well, the main policeman always seems to be chasing him and always seems to be not where the ManThing is, until the very end at least as well. So again, it just seems like more time to spend sort of having these sort of like pointless plots in place to sort of take focus off the actual monster story itself. Now, it may seem I'm being overly harsh on this film. Now, if it wasn't called ManThing and it was called a generic swamp monster film, then maybe you can kind of let it off for a little bit, because it's, you know, it's just going to be a generic sci-fi fodder. But it is based on a sort of a pre-existing Marvel comic character. I feel it deserves a little bit more scrutiny than maybe some. Now, like I said, it has its good points. I guess when the actual the monster is attacking, it's, you know, the special effects are better than average in regards to the sort of the sci-fi films, and it doesn't look too bad in regards to the actual look of the creature, although not still like the ManThing. So it's pretty average for me. I'm glad they made a ManThing film. I don't think there was any chance it was going to be anything other than just a B movie, to be honest with you. I've little hope of ever seeing ManThing again on a live action version. If they did, I mean, there's talk of a Hulk TV series at some point. I actually think ManThing might be quite a good character to have, maybe in an episode of that, if he comes up across, you know, if the Hulk ever goes into the swamp, and maybe he could, you know, meet ManThing, as I'm sure the rights have probably reverted back to Marvel by now. But, you know, that's just my opinion. So I don't think we'll ever see a ManThing film again, so I think this is going to be it. But a little bit disappointed, as I am quite a big ManThing fan, I was kind of disappointed with the way this film. It's certainly one of the weaker Marvel films, but it could have been worse. So I'm going to give this film a 4.5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment, and I look forward to seeing you next time. See you later.